little is known about the reign of Sadietes, perhaps because it was so very short. Herodotus reports that he ruled for 12 years, although modern estimates have suggested it was more like 2. Although Sadietes apparently continued Lydia's wars against the city of Miletus, the kingdom continued to be beset by repeated Cimmerian raiding, which sapped the kingdom of its strength, eventually ending Sadietes' reign. Like his father, we cannot say with any certainty whether he was deposed or killed in battle. It is with the ascension of Sadietes' son, Alyattes, to the throne of Lydia that the fortunes of this kingdom changed dramatically. The greatest geopolitical shift which enabled the rise of what we might consider to be the Lydian Empire was the final defeat of the Cimmerians, whose repeated invasions and raiding had effectively subdued Lydian power since the reign of Ardys. Entering into an alliance with the Eastern Iranian nomadic people known as the Scythians, and acting with the approval of the Neo-Assyrians, Alyattes and the Scythian king Mades conducted a series of campaigns against the Cimmerians in central Anatolia. Exactly how these campaigns were conducted is unclear. However, what is certain is that Cimmerian power was utterly broken, and the nomads were once again put to flight, likely in the early to mid 620s BC. Both Lydian and Scythian forces, perhaps acting somewhat in concert, brought about the end of the Cimmerians. Strabo claims it was Mades who finally defeated them, while Herodotus ascribed Alyattes that honour. In any case, the vanquishing of the Cimmerians left Alyattes with an opportunity to expand a resurgent Lydia. Alyattes continued his predecessor's wars against the city of Miletus, finally concluding a peace treaty which established Lydian overlordship and ensured access to the city's markets. Lydia's good relations with the city of Ephesus were renewed with a union between one of Alyattes' daughters and the Ephesian tyrant Melas the Younger. Furthermore, Alyattes continued to pursue friendly relations with the Carian city-states to the south, slowly establishing Lydian political supremacy over this region. To the east, Alyattes expanded his rule into the cities of what was formerly Phrygia. Taking advantage of the close cultural links between the two regions, the Lydian king allowed local Phrygian rulers to retain power as his vassals in return for regular tribute and military support. Lydian diplomatic officials would have no doubt been present at vassal courts, and some cities, such as Gordium, may have even had Lydian governors. In this way, Alyattes expanded Lydian political hegemony over almost the entirety of western Anatolia, although this was no doubt also accompanied by a good deal of armed conflict. His position strengthened, Alyattes once again campaigned against the Ionian cities, conquering Smyrna in around the year 600 BC, and subsequently the city of Colophon, whilst agreeing trade settlements with the city of Clazomenae. However, the aggressive westward expansion of the Lydian king, which brought the borders of the kingdom to the banks of the Halys River, precipitated conflict with the newly powerful Medes in eastern Anatolia. War broke out in 590 BC, only ending in 585 BC. According to Herodotus, a solar eclipse, which is calculated to have occurred on the 28th of May, 585, interrupted a battle which was about to occur between the Lydians and the Medians. Such an ill omen supposedly convinced Alyattes and the Median king Cyaxares to sue for peace, a peace which was sealed with a marriage alliance between Cyaxares' son and a Lydian princess. At the time of Alyattes' death later that year, Lydia dominated western Anatolia. The Lydian king, responsible for minting the first coins in history, had successfully established his realm as an economic and political powerhouse. His funeral tumuli was one of the largest ever built, standing some 360 meters in diameter and 61 meters in height, and can still be seen today. Under Alyattes' son and successor, the famously wealthy Croesus, Lydia experienced the full flourishing of her might. However, during what may have appeared to be the kingdom's strongest ever period, Lydian power was suddenly snuffed out by the might of the conquering Persian king, Cyrus the Great. We shall return to the historical narrative later, but for now, our business is with the society and culture of the Lydians. Aside from our knowledge that the king was the head of the Lydian government, we have almost no information about how the state functioned. Aristotle's Politics, which painstakingly explains the governmental structures of various nations, omits Lydia entirely. Sources often describe the importance of the king's role as leader of the army, directing Lydian forces in the field. No doubt the king's role as head of state meant that he was responsible for maintaining relations with foreign powers, hosting foreign emissaries, and sending his own abroad. Lydian kings also appear to have had control of the royal mint, a crucial element in maintaining political and economic supremacy. Command of the mint in Lydia, a land rich in gold, silver, and electrum, explains the legendary reputation for opulence that Lydian kings enjoyed, most notably Croesus, whose name has become a byword for extravagant wealth. The presence of abundant natural resources within Lydia itself would probably preclude any real need for domestic taxation, except perhaps in times of war or for great construction projects, as Herodotus hints at regarding the construction of the tomb of Alyattes. There is in Lydia the tomb of Alyattes, the father of Croesus, the base whereof is made of great stones, and the rest is of mounded earth. It was built by the men of the market, and the artificers, and the prostitutes. There remained, till my time, 5 cornerstones set on the top of the tomb, and on these there was graven the records of the work done by each kind, and measurement showed that the prostitute share of the work was the greatest. Lydian rulers did, however, levy taxes on their subject peoples, and tributary states on their borders. Herodotus tells us that Croesus was the first to exact taxes from the Greek cities clustered along the shores of the Aegean Sea, which at the time were subjects of the Lydians. Taxes would also no doubt have been levied in some capacity on trade passing through Lydia, although we have no details regarding this. The Lydian capital of Sardis was of paramount importance to the kingdom, a centre of trade and political power which may have been permanently inhabited since the Neolithic. The city was enormous, covering over 100 hectares, and featured a strong citadel perched atop a natural craggy rock formation which overlooked the city. It was not only the stronghold, but the 20-metre thick city walls which made Sardis a formidable defensive site. A fortified palace, royal mint, and a treasury gave Sardis all the trappings of a powerful ancient capital. The nearby burial mounds of Bin Tepe are the site of hundreds of burial mounds known as tumuli, where the elites of Sardis were interred. To the north was a large section of the city which extended beyond the wall, complete with industrial, residential, and commercial areas. The extramural settlement of Sardis appears to have stretched even to the streams of the Pactolus River, where precious metals washed down by the river were collected. The vast majority of Sardis's residents likely lived in stone and mud brick houses, perhaps even featuring courtyards. The houses of the rich appear to have typically been roofed with tile, while the poorer residents of the city used clay and straw. Stone-cut masonry was used for monumental buildings, such as the city's Acropolis. Lydian society, like many of its contemporaries, was dominated by an aristocratic elite. Landowners who were also known to have participated in business, such as mining. Beneath the upper classes, we know of a priestly class: merchants, craftsmen, farmers, freemen, serfs, and slaves. Literary evidence gives no details on Lydian status. It suggested that they would most likely have been prisoners of war. It would appear that Lydian women were by no means totally marginalised, and did certainly participate in economic life, in particular in the textile industry. Herodotus, writing in his histories around the year 430 BC, records a curious and bizarre piece of information regarding Lydian women. All the daughters of the common people of Lydia ply the trade of prostitutes to collect dowries until they can get themselves husbands, and they themselves offer themselves in marriage. Despite this intriguing assertion, it is worth pointing out that Herodotus' work is often filled with semi-legendary and mythological information, as well as simple misunderstandings. It has been suggested that this passage in Herodotus could well be a reference to the practice of temple or sacred prostitution, a kind of act carried out in a religious context as part of worship or ritual. This practice certainly did exist, but was nowhere near as common as Herodotus seems to imply. Herodotus noted that the customs of the Lydians were very similar to those of the Greeks, which in of itself is a valuable clue which allows us to understand how Lydian society may have functioned. In fact, although the Lydians were not Greek themselves, their close geographic, political, and economic links to the Greek cities meant that there was doubtless a great deal of cultural exchange between the two, and that they shared what might be called a cultural continuum. Interestingly, Herodotus asserts that it was in fact the Lydians who invented many of the games which the Greeks played, such as knucklebones and ball, distractions which they created in order to stave off the effects of starvation caused by a long-running famine. Then it was that they invented the games of dice and knucklebones and ball, and all other forms of game except dice, which the Lydians do not claim to have discovered. Then, using their discovery to lighten the famine, every other day they would play for the whole day, so that they would not have to look for food, and the next day they quit their play and ate. This was their way of life for 18 years. But though it is slightly dubious that the Lydians actually invented all these games, dice games, for example, were known to have been played in Mesopotamia before Lydia, the presence of large numbers of terracotta dice and knucklebones found at the excavations at Sardis do attest to the popularity of these games amongst the Lydians. The Lydian diet would have differed very little to the contemporary Mediterranean diet, with consumption of olive oil being very important. Wine, too, was commonly consumed, and the slopes of Mount Tmolus were noted for the excellent grapes that they produced. The average Lydian would no doubt have subsisted off a diet consisting primarily of vegetables. Wheat, milk, and honey were common, and bread was therefore a staple of the average Lydian's diet. Meat, as with most pre-modern cultures, was rather expensive, and primarily consumed by the rich. However, fish, which was apparently plentiful in the river Hermus and the Gygaean lake, was eaten more widely. The aforementioned mineral bounty of Lydia provided the kingdom with considerable wealth. Gold, silver, copper, iron and sulphur were all mined, and gold could also be found in the waters of the Pactolus River, which flowed down towards Sardis from the heights of Mount Tmolus. Marble, quarried mostly in the coastal regions of Lydia, was another precious resource which the Lydians could use to create products, or else sell abroad for profit. It was through these mineral resources that Lydia and its kings grew rich, gaining a reputation for enormous wealth. Even after the Lydian kingdom was conquered and absorbed by the Persians, Lydia retained its famed riches. A nobleman named Pythias, grandson of Croesus, is described by the subjects of the Persian king Xerxes as follows: "O king, this is the one who gave your father Darius the gift of a golden plane tree and vine. He is now the richest man we know after you." Gold, silver, and another naturally occurring alloy comprised of the two, known as electrum, which could also be found in the Pactolus River, were all used to create Lydian coinage from around the late 7th century BC, the earliest metallic coinage ever produced. In fact, it is likely from Lydia that the practice of coin minting spread to the Greeks. The use of coinage gave the Lydians distinct advantages when it came to certain types of economic activity, such as trade, making it far easier to facilitate complex and long-distance trade deals. As a result, trade was a crucial element of the Lydian economy. Lydia was well positioned to take advantage of trade travelling east-west through Anatolia, both allowing the Lydians to extract tolls from passing traders, and allowing them to engage in trade themselves with great ease. The ports of Ephesus and Smyrna, and the great city of Sardis became important trading hubs, from which goods were exported and imported. Interestingly, excavations at Sardis appear to suggest that a majority of trading activity was carried out by smaller businesses, rather than by massive conglomerates of merchants. Beyond trade and precious metals, the Lydians also engaged in the manufacture of a variety of products. Cattle and sheep were raised in order to provide not only food, but also leather and wool, which were then turned into various textiles and clothing. In fact, the Lydians were apparently well known for their skilled weavers and fabric dyers. In Greek mythology, the Lydian Arachne challenged the goddess Athena to a weaving contest and was transformed into a spider for her hubris, condemned to weave for all eternity. Luxury Lydian garments were often threaded with gold or incorporated small golden decorations, and Lydian vases depict figures wearing purple robes. The highly prestigious purple dye, obtained from sea snails and first invented by the Phoenicians, may perhaps have been later produced by the Lydians. With such an abundance of precious metals, metalworking was practiced extensively by the Lydians. It was the great skill of Lydian metalworkers and refiners that, combined with the large amounts of gold to be found in the region, made Lydian kings, such as Croesus, so wealthy. In fact, a gold refinery excavated from Sardis is thought to have been roughly contemporaneous with Croesus. Oils and perfumes are also known to have been produced, both for cosmetic and for medicinal purposes. War in the ancient Near East, as in most periods of history, was a relatively common occurrence. Owing to its position in western Anatolia, Lydian warfare techniques appear to be closely related to Greek and Near Eastern influences. However, to what extent these military elements were originally Greek, or whether they were first invented in Anatolia or the further Near East, is unclear. For example, Herodotus in Book 1 of the Histories credits the Carians, the people who dwelt to the south of the Lydians, with having been the first to attach crests to their helmets, paint blazons on their shields, and equip said shields with hand grips, all things which we more readily associate with ancient Greek warriors. The core of Lydian armies was formed of the classical hoplite, heavily armed and armoured soldiers, equipped with a spear of around 2.5 metres in length and a short double-edged sword for close combat. Hoplites typically sported a cuirass, perhaps of leather or bronze, and a helmet, whilst also carrying a large round shield. The spear and shield were utilised to fight in the famous phalanx, a mass formation of hoplites in which each soldier would interlock shields with the man next to him, forming an impenetrable wall bristling with sharp spears. However, despite Lydian hoplites apparently being equipped in a very similar fashion to their Greek contemporaries, there are some notable differences. A Lydian wall painting from the Tartali tumulus displays soldiers wielding distinctive curved swords, which appear to be somewhat similar in form to the Greek kopis or the ancient Egyptian khopesh. Furthermore, whilst Lydians do appear to have used the Corinthian helmet utilised by the Greeks, a helmet recovered from the ruins of Sardis in 1987 and dated to around the time of the Persian conquest of Lydia in the mid-6th century BC, displays a notable departure from this style. This helmet, featuring a skull piece design with attendant cheek flaps, is highly unusual for Greek or Near Eastern helmets of the pre-Roman period, and would be more readily associated with helmets of the 2nd century AD. However, the Lydians were most noted for their cavalry. Greek authors very often refer to Lydian troops as hippomachoi, or horse fighters, and the poet Bacchylides called Croesus's kingdom horse-taming Lydia. Herodotus, writing about the reign of Croesus, noted the following: "Now, at this time, there was no nation in Asia more valiant or warlike than the Lydian. It was their custom to fight on horseback, carrying long spears, and they were skillful at managing horses." Furthermore, the 7th century Greek poet Memnonus of Smyrna made reference to the thick ranks of Lydian cavalry, perhaps suggesting that they customarily fought in massed formations. 2nd century AD Roman Macedonian author Polyaenus reported that the Lydians, under King Alyattes, used war dogs against the Cimmerians around the year 600 BC, in what may be the earliest example of dogs being used in battle. He marched against them and ordered his men to take into battle with him a number of large, fierce dogs. When the dogs were released, they fell on the barbarians as they would on a herd of wild beasts. They injured many of them, so as to disable them from action and put the others to flight. We know of one particularly notable use of siege technology by the Lydians at the Siege of Smyrna, that of throwing up large earth mounds beside the city walls in order to attack the fortifications and gain access to the city, in a style very similar to Assyrian siege techniques. Lydian engineering skill extended to defensive measures too. The walls of the capital, Sardis, are known to have been immensely strong, measuring some 20 meters thick. One area of warfare in which the Lydians were apparently lacking was their navy. However, the time from land, and apparently only gaining access to the sea with the capture of Cryenia and King Gyges. The Lydian navy was likely small and relatively. Reportedly, Croesus' planned invasion of the city of Mylittini on the island of Lesbos was called off in the face of the island's superior naval power. Lydian art appears to have been heavily influenced by Greek art, particularly in the 7th and 6th centuries BC. Indeed, it has been suggested that Eastern motifs actually entered Lydia through Greece, rather than directly from Eastern Anatolia. Although artifacts from Lydia are somewhat rare, ceramics do survive in relatively high numbers. The basic technique for producing ceramic products in antiquity was fairly standard. However, Lydian pottery was of a pretty high standard, with many pieces featuring rather beautiful, coloured marble. The style of the vast majority of pieces is either Greek or native Anatolian in nature, with a few localised variations. For example, Lydian amphorae are boxy in comparison to contemporary Greek examples, with much wider necks, and were often decorated with wavy lines. Pot stands, jugs, amphorae, pyxis, stemmed dishes, cups, bowls and lamps have all been found, to name but a few. The majority of Lydian pottery, aside from so-called courseware, was painted. Monochrome patterns, popular in the 8th century BC, gave way to the use of black, purplish-brown, red and white, as Lydian potters were increasingly inspired by the works of their Greek contemporaries, whose products were certainly being imported into Sardis. Black on red ware, produced in Lydia, often features Greek-style concentric patterning, including circles and semicircles, drawn with a special kind of compass, with several tiny brushes attached to a single wooden handle. Although almost all Lydian pottery was derived from Greek styles, a distinctive kind of pottery vessel known as a Lydion was a Lydian invention, from where it spread to Greece. A Lydion was a small kind of spherical ceramic vase, which stood on a tall foot and was often decorated with horizontal stripes, and used to store perfumes, creams and other cosmetics. Amongst the finest examples of Lydian artistry were pieces which were found in aristocratic burial tumuli in the Gure area, close to the Hermus River. Plundered by looters in the 60s, treasures from these incredible burial mounds were only returned to Turkey in the 1990s after a lengthy legal battle. Dating from the mid to late 6th century BC, these artifacts display Greek, Anatolian and Persian artistic influences. A magnificent wine jug whose handle is styled in the form of a boy, resting upon 2 rams and grasping 2 lions above his head. What makes this vessel even more remarkable is its size. This level of detail was achieved in a vessel which stands at just over 17 centimeters high.